The fateful night at the gas station. The gas station stood in eerie silence on the edge of the highway, its dim fluorescent lights flickering weakly against the cold concrete ground. It was late, so late that the world felt deserted, save for the wind rustling through faded advertisement boards. Back Thonson stepped out of his sleek black car, stretching slightly before grabbing the gas pump. He wasn't in a hurry. The long drive gave him rare moments of solitude, a chance to reflect. Just as the fuel started flowing, flashing red and blue lights flickered in the car's glossy surface. A patrol car crept into the lot, rolling past before stopping a few meters away. No siren, no loudspeaker, just a quiet presence, an unmistakable one. Back glanced at the rearview mirror. The door of the squad car opened, and a young officer stepped out. His movements were controlled, precise, his eyes scanning the surroundings as if searching for something. Or someone. The way he approached, rigid, assertive, told back everything he needed to know. This wasn't a routine check. Evening. The officer's tone was sharp, carrying a self-imposed authority. What brings you out this late? Back remained composed, gripping the fuel pump while giving the officer a slow, measured look. I think I'm getting gas. The officer narrowed his eyes, displeased by the response. This your car? His gaze flickered toward the expensive vehicle, as if it didn't belong in a place like this. Back didn't answer immediately. He placed the pump back into the station, closed the fuel cap, then turned to fully face the officer. He had been through this before, too many times to be surprised. Is there a problem, officer? The officer adjusted his stance, feet planted wider, chin raised slightly, hands clasped behind his back. His posture screamed interrogation. I need to see your papers. No reason, no explanation. Just a cold demand, one Back had heard too many times. Am I being detained? A flicker of irritation crossed the officer's face. His jaw tensed. He didn't like being challenged. You're acting suspicious. Back raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. And what does suspicious look like? The officer took a step closer, their distance now mere inches. A silent tension crackled between them. You're dressed too well to be pumping gas at this hour. A smirk ghosted across Back's lips. Seriously? He was wearing a tailored navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, polished leather shoes. Hardly a casual look for a late-night pit stop. But since when did dressing well become probable cause? Maybe I like looking sharp. Is that illegal now? The officer's grip on his belt tightened. I don't have time for this. Hand over your ID, now. Back inhaled slowly. He knew this game. The officer was waiting for an excuse, an anxious fidget, a hint of nervousness, anything to escalate the situation. Without probable cause, I don't have to. Then it happened. The moment he had been expecting. The officer's fingers brushed the handle of his baton. A small motion, but one with huge implications, an unspoken threat. But before anything could unfold, blinding headlights cut through the gas station's dim glow. Both men turned as 3 black SUVs glided smoothly into the lot, parking near the pumps with precision. The glossy exterior reflected the gas station's weak light. The officer instinctively took a step back. Something was off. The doors opened in unison. Men in dark suits emerged, silent, calculated. The air around them shifted. The officer swallowed hard. The way these men stood, their posture, the discreet earpieces peeking from behind their ears, these were not ordinary civilians. One of them, an older man with salt and pepper hair and a severe expression, strode straight past the officer, stopping in front of Back without acknowledging anyone else. Sir, are you all right? For the first time that night, the officer was no longer the one in control. Back shifted his gaze from the officer to the man in front of him. His smirk widened slightly. "I'm fine, but it seems I was just being harassed." The older man didn't turn to look at the officer. He didn't need to. The atmosphere had already shifted. The officer, now visibly unsettled, glanced between the men surrounding him. He no longer had the upper hand. Who is he?" the officer stammered. The older man finally acknowledged him, but there was no warmth in his stare. "What's your name, officer?" "Grant. Officer Grant." A slow nod. "Good, remember it, because in a few hours it will be on multiple internal reports." Grant's face paled, and now he was the one under scrutiny. The shift in power. The gas station sat quietly under the dim streetlights, casting long shadows on the rough concrete ground. Back Thonson stood beside his car, calmly watching the numbers on the fuel pump climb. He had been driving for hours, relishing the solitude of empty highways, until the red and blue lights reflected off his windshield, slicing through the night. A patrol car rolled into the lot, gliding slowly like a predator stalking its prey. The door swung open, and a young officer stepped out. He adjusted his belt, his eyes scanning the vehicle as if searching for a flaw, a mistake, an excuse. "Evening." The officer's voice was sharp, but there was something forced about it. Back didn't reply immediately. He closed the fuel cap, returned the nozzle to the pump, then turned to face the officer. "What brings you out here this late?" A simple question, but the weight behind it was clear. It wasn't curiosity, it was suspicion. "Getting gas," Back answered flatly, his gaze unwavering. The officer tilted his head slightly, the corners of his lips curling into a faint smirk. "This your car? What exactly are you asking?" The unspoken tension between them became more apparent. The officer wasn't asking out of genuine concern. He was asking because he could. It was an assertion of power, a test to see how the man in front of him would react. "I need to see your papers." "Any particular reason?" Back's voice was calm but firm. The officer took a step forward. "You're acting suspicious." A vague accusation, but not a surprising one. Back had heard it before, too many times to be caught off guard. "And what does suspicious look like?" A long pause. The officer had no real answer. But the power wasn't in the reasoning. It was in the fact that he didn't need a reason. "I don't have time for this," the officer pressed. "Hand over your ID, now." Back didn't move. "Am I being detained?" A flicker of irritation flashed across the officer's face. He had been waiting for this, an excuse to escalate. "Are you resisting an officer?" A silent threat hung in the air. No one needed to say how this could end. And then, the moment everything changed, blinding headlights flooded the gas station. 3 black SUVs rolled into the lot, moving slowly but with unmistakable precision. The officer stiffened. His instincts screamed, "Something is wrong." The doors swung open, and men in tailored suits stepped out. Their postures were rigid, their movements calculated. The officer took an unconscious step back. "What the hell?" he muttered. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority strode forward, ignoring the officer entirely. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked back, his tone neutral but laced with meaning. The officer frowned. "Wait, who's in charge here?" he demanded, trying to reclaim control. The suited man finally turned to look at him. The moment their eyes met, the officer realized his mistake. "What's your name, officer?" "Grant, Officer Grant." A slow nod. "Good, remember it." The air between them grew heavier. "I still need to see his papers," Officer Grant insisted, though his voice had lost some of its edge. The suited man smirked faintly. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The officer glanced at Back again, really looking this time. The expensive suit, the composed demeanor, and then it hit him. Back was not an ordinary man. The suited man reached into his jacket and produced a badge. Secret Service. Officer Grant's face drained of color. He had picked the wrong person. Loss of control. The flickering fluorescent lights at the gas station cast eerie shadows across the cold concrete. Back Thonson stood by his car, eyes on the digital numbers rolling upward on the fuel pump. Tonight was like any other. Just another long drive on the highway, another quick stop for gas. But the moment red and blue lights flashed across his windshield, he knew everything was about to change. A patrol car rolled into the parking lot, tires scraping lightly against the asphalt as it came to a stop. Officer Grant stepped out, adjusting his duty belt, his sharp gaze sweeping over Back's vehicle. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to control. Evening. His voice was dry, laced with authority. Back didn't reply immediately. He closed the fuel cap, turned to face the officer, and watched as he approached. "What are you doing here?" Grant asked. "Getting gas." Back's voice was calm but firm. The officer smirked. "This your car?" Back met his gaze without hesitation. "Yeah." A beat of silence stretched between them. Grant tilted his head slightly as if considering something. Then he took a step forward, resting his hand on the baton strapped to his belt. "I need to see your papers." Back slowly crossed his arms over his chest. "Any reason?" The unspoken challenge in his tone made Grant's eyes narrow. "You're acting suspicious." Back let out a quiet chuckle and shook his head. Suspicious? How many times had he heard that word before? "Are you planning to search my car?" Grant shifted slightly. "I could, if necessary." Back studied him, noticing the restrained eagerness in his tone. He wanted a reaction. He wanted Back to respond exactly as expected, with fear, with outrage, with something that justified escalation. "I just finished fueling up," Back said, voice level, but the officer didn't back down. "Step away from the car." Back didn't move. "Am I under arrest?" "I won't ask again." The air thickened, tension pressing in from all sides. The moment was reaching its breaking point, and then it happened. Blinding headlights flooded the gas station. 3 black SUVs rolled into the lot, moving with deliberate intent. Grant blinked, the muscles in his jaw twitching. He hadn't expected this. The doors opened almost simultaneously. Men in tailored suits stepped out, their movements precise, efficient, practiced. Grant instinctively took a step back. Back glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in his expression. "Looks like I'm not going anywhere after all." The shift in power. The doors of the black SUVs swung open almost simultaneously. The sound of polished leather shoes striking the concrete echoed through the quiet gas station, a silent declaration of dominance. Back Thonson didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He already knew who was arriving. Officer Grant, who had commanded the situation just seconds ago, suddenly found himself uncertain. His grip tightened around his baton, but the confidence in his posture had faded. This was not a scenario he had prepared for. One of the men stepped forward, salt and pepper hair, a perfectly tailored black suit, eyes cold and calculating. He didn't even acknowledge Grant. "Sir, are you all right?" His voice was low and steady, but the question wasn't directed at Grant. Back gave a small nod. "I'm fine." For the first time since the confrontation began, Grant blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what was happening. "Who are they?" he asked, attempting to maintain his authority, though it was already slipping. The man in the suit turned his gaze toward Grant, evaluating him not as a police officer, but as an obstacle to be dealt with. "Who are you?" Grant cleared his throat, struggling to regain control. Officer Grant, LAPD, this is an ongoing investigation. Not anymore. The man cut him off, voice calm but absolute. Two more men stepped forward from the SUVs, keeping their distance but clearly monitoring the situation. The gas station was no longer Grant's jurisdiction. The officer took half a step back, glancing at Back. Who is he? Back crossed his arms, a faint smirk forming. Doesn't matter. Grant swallowed hard. One of the men reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge, holding it up just long enough for Grant to see. The polished metal caught the fluorescent lights. Secret Service. Grant's face drained of color. He swallowed again, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I didn't know, he muttered. That's the problem. The older man replied. A tense silence followed. Then the agent turned to Back. Would you like to press charges? All the air seemed to leave the gas station. Grant stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with each sharp breath. Back held his gaze for a moment before shaking his head slightly. Not necessary. The lesson has been taught. Grant trembled slightly. He had lost. Not through violence, not through force, but through real power. The power reversal. The gas station was steeped in a tense silence. Back Thonson remained still, his hands relaxed at his sides, but his eyes never left Officer Grant. For a fleeting moment, the officer still clung to the illusion of control, but everything had already shifted. The three black SUVs had pulled in without a sound, as if they had materialized from the darkness itself. The men in black suits stepped out with deliberate movements, their sharp eyes scanning everything, seeing through the situation as if they had already known the outcome. They didn't need to rush. They were already in command. Grant blinked rapidly, his grip tightening around the baton on his belt, but he no longer had the confidence to draw it. The air of authority he once carried had begun to fracture. The lead agent, salt and pepper hair, a suit tailored to perfection, eyes as sharp as a blade, walked toward Back without so much as glancing at the officer. Sir, are you all right? Grant tensed, his body jerking slightly at the words. That question wasn't meant for him. I'm fine. Back's voice was calm, as if he had expected this moment all along. Grant swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Back and the men in suits. He couldn't place exactly who they were, but one thing was clear. They held far more power than he did. One of the agents pulled out a badge, holding it up just long enough for Grant to read the words, Secret Service. Grant stiffened, the color draining from his face. The balance of power had completely shifted. I didn't know, he muttered, his voice rasping. The salt and pepper-haired agent regarded him coldly. That's precisely the problem. A moment of silence, then the agent turned to Back. Would you like to press charges? The words were like a gunshot in the still air. Grant's breathing became shallow, his fear creeping into every fiber of his being. Back took his time answering. He studied the officer like a predator assessing its prey. Grant was shaking. Finally, Back inhaled slowly, then shook his head slightly. No need. His eyes never left Grant. The lesson has been taught. Grant clenched his fists, cold sweat trickling down his neck. He had lost, not because of a gun, not because of an arrest, but because, for the first time in his life, he had come face to face with a power far greater than his own, and he had no way to fight it. Power Shift Back Thonson walked toward his car with slow, deliberate steps. There was no rush. The moment the black SUVs had arrived, the outcome had already been decided. Officer Grant remained frozen, his eyes locked onto the men in black suits. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, his hand still gripping the baton he no longer dared to use. One of the agents, The older man with salt and pepper hair and eyes like sharpened steel studied Grant as if his assessment was complete. "You're lucky this time, Officer Grant." His tone carried no threat, yet it was far from forgiveness. It was merely the truth. Grant was lucky because Back had chosen not to bury him, but the gas station had seen everything. The woman by the window still clutched her phone. The man in the car had stopped pretending not to care. The cashier behind the counter pressed his lips together, his eyes flickering between those present. Everyone knew exactly who was at fault, and that realization shattered Grant's entire world. Back stopped just before opening his car door. He turned to Grant, locking eyes with him. "You can't do this." A simple statement. No anger, no condemnation, just an undeniable truth. "Not to me, not to anyone." Grant clenched his jaw, but he couldn't argue, because he knew it was true. Another agent glanced at his watch before giving Back a subtle nod. Their work here was done. Back opened his car door, slid inside, and started the engine. No sirens, no violence. No one was dragged away in handcuffs. Only a man driving away, leaving behind a cop who had just realized he had lost all control. Raw truth. The air at the gas station was thick with suffocating tension. Officer Grant stood frozen, his eyes locked onto Back Thonson, but this time there was no trace of dominance or authority in his gaze. He knew he had lost. Back wasn't in a hurry. He had seen too many situations like this before, but rarely had the balance of power shifted so completely, so irrevocably, as it had tonight. The 3 black SUVs remained parked just a few feet away, their engines still running, like silent executioners awaiting the final command. Grant swallowed hard. The baton in his grip was meaningless now. One of the agents, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and razor-sharp eyes, stepped closer, studying Grant as if he had already dissected every flaw in his character. "Do you want to press charges?" His voice was steady, but the weight of his words made Grant's breath hitch. "Press charges? File a complaint? Take this to court?" A single word from Back could end Grant's career forever. For the first time in his life, Grant felt his entire existence dangling by a thread. Back inhaled slowly. He didn't need to say much. His silence alone was crushing. Grant wanted to speak, wanted to explain, wanted to justify. But how could he? Only minutes ago, he believed he was in control. Now, he was just a man standing among those who held real power. Back pulled his keys from his pocket, walking toward his car with deliberate ease. There was no need to rush. As he reached the door, he cast one final glance at Grant and said, "The problem isn't who I am." A pause. "It's why you think that matters." Grant opened his mouth, but no words came out. Back slid into his car, started the engine, and drove away. Not because he was running, but because he had already won. The truth unveiled. The gas station pulsed with suffocating tension. Officer Grant still stood there, gripping his baton as if it could salvage the last remnants of his authority. But he knew the game had changed. Back Thonson was no longer the one on the verge of being controlled. 3 black SUVs remained parked in perfect formation, their engines purring softly, unhurried. The men inside knew time was on their side. A tall agent with salt and pepper hair stepped closer to Grant. He didn't need to threaten. His mere presence carried the weight of certainty. "Do you want to press charges?" The question landed like a verdict. Grant didn't answer immediately, because he knew even if he denied it, everything had already been recorded. The surveillance cameras, the witnesses, the silent phones still capturing the moment. He had no way out. Back studied the officer for a long moment, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted Grant to feel the weight of silence. Grant inhaled deeply. He had lost. But instead of accepting his defeat with quiet dignity, he still clung to something, anything. "I don't know who you are." Back let out a quiet chuckle. There was no anger in his eyes, just the stark, undeniable truth. "That's the problem." Grant froze. "It doesn't matter who I am." A pause. "What matters is why you think it should change the way you treat me." The words sliced through Grant's ego like a scalpel. For the first time in his career, he felt completely exposed to the truth. Back didn't wait any longer. He turned, opened his car door, and slid inside. No rush, because he wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving behind a lone officer standing beneath the flickering gas station lights. Grant had thought this would be a lesson he taught someone else, but it was he who had just learned a lesson he would never forget. A reflection on power and justice. This story isn't just about a confrontation between a police officer and a wrongly suspected man. It exposes a deeper truth about how power can be abused and how unconscious bias can lead to catastrophic misjudgments. Officer Grant believed he had full control of the situation, but what he failed to anticipate was that some people do not bow to the misuse of authority. Back Thonson didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to resist. His calmness spoke louder than any act of defiance. The arrival of the agents didn't just shift the power dynamic. It highlighted a crucial reality. True authority doesn't come from intimidation or force. It comes from justice and accountability. The lesson here is clear. Fairness cannot be based on appearance or status. Those who hold power must be responsible for how they wield it, and the truth will always find a way to surface. Not everyone is as fortunate as Back, having people in power to step in when injustice occurs. That is why society must remain vigilant, speak up, and protect what is right. Because justice should not only be served when the black SUVs arrive. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.